This is The Right Approach. I am J.W. Judge. With me is my co-host, Barbara Hinske. This is a podcast for writers to learn more about the craft of writing as we explore a new topic every week. And this week, we're going to get into a topic that I think we started talking about during a recent episode and said we'd come back to. And so we are actually coming back to it, where we're going to talk about using dialogue and descriptions in a way that doesn't result in you having 4 pages of expositions that are just, giant blocks of text. But before we jump into that, in real time, it's been a while since Barbara and I have talked about what we've got going on with our writing. I know it's only been a couple of weeks on the podcast itself. So Barbara, I know you've got a new book coming out this week, in a couple of days. I've got one coming out actually today. It is out. And so let's talk about yours, and then we'll come back to me.
Okay. So the third book in my Guiding Emily series, Over Every Hurdle, will be available in print and for ebook on Amazon, and print anywhere you would buy a print book. I'm just very excited about this series. The first book, Guiding Emily, is in audio, and I just found out last week that the audio publisher is going to exercise their option and pick up books 2 and 3, which is very nice. Podium had 2 different narrators for the first book. One point of view is the guide dog Garth, and I'm just so thrilled because I think they're going to get the same actor to do that voice, and hopefully the other actor is a very big audiobook narrator, and I don't know if she's going to have time to do it. But anyway, so those are fun things coming out with that. And the screenwrites for the first book are still moving forward. So I'm real anxious for this third book to get out there. And I was just kind of on a roll when I wrote that. So I went ahead and busted through and wrote the 4th book in the series, which is now in copy editing. So I'll do that next year. But I am feeling pretty darn pleased with myself for having a finished novel in my hip pocket. So that's
let me ask you an audiobook question.
Yeah.
What kind of voice does Garth have?
I was so lucky when they did the first book. It was during COVID, during lockdown, and they got a Broadway actor by the name of Fred Berman, who was Timon in The Lion King, and he's done a bunch of other things. But, he's sitting around his apartment in lockdown in New York doing nothing. So he was the voice of Garth. He is brilliant. He brings such warmth. He has a young male voice, which is what Garth needs. And he brings humor and warmth. And Julia Whalen, who is a biggie in the audio narration world, did the rest of the book. So I could not have been more pleased or proud with that first audiobook. And she has said that she will not do series. This is a series. So I've been trying to, send Podium all the comments I get from newly blind people to say that the book has given them hope and all that kind of stuff, to try and convince Julie that maybe there's more in this than just doing another series. I don't know, but I'm pitching it. So if anybody out there knows Julie Whalen, get to her and say, please do the Emily series. It's would be good. Anyway, so that's what I got going on. So tell me about your book. Yay.
All right. So the book that I have coming out on November 1st as the release date is Write Your Novel One Day at a Time. And, I have full-time law practice. And since 2018, this is my 8th book that's come out. 3 nonfiction books about law practice, and then 3 novels, and this book all under my pen name, J.W. Judge. And so it is about making time to write and get the creative work done while you have a job and you're raising a family and you have everything else going on in your life. Most people can still get it done if it's something that is really a high priority for them. And that's not to say everybody can, because you're going to have seasons of life and that you can't do it. And sometimes those seasons last weeks or months, or maybe, I know people that have got 5 or 6 kids, and there's just like, I can't imagine trying to do it in that situation.
Yeah.
But for people who, like, this is something that you want to prioritize, and writing, it's called Write Your Novel, but it would apply to any, fiction or nonfiction or whatever. And so when I decided to write this book, I also decided on a structure that I wasn't sure if it was going to work or not. So the first third of the book is basically journal entries I did almost daily journal entries while I wrote my third novel. And sometimes that was, 110 words, and they were all terrible, and I hate everything, and I never want to write again. And some days it was, I wrote 1,500 words, and, it was great. And so it's just a day by day of the word count of what I was experiencing, kind of, what's going on in my experience of, learning the craft of writing. And so that's the first third of it. The second third is interviews with other authors, including you, about writing. And many of those had part-time jobs or full-time jobs when they started, and had transitioned into, some of them, full-time careers as writers and things like that. So that was the second third of the book. And then the last third of the book was practical, implementable advice for goal setting and using performance metrics to motivate yourself and to keep track of what you want to do. And, that doesn't work for everybody. It works for me. I've been somebody who has done goal setting every year since 2016, and it's been hugely instrumental for me, both in my law practice and in my writing. Like, this year, I set a goal of writing 100,000 words, which I had gotten close to since I started keeping track of my word count. Hang on. So since 2018, I've kept up with my word count. I read a book by James Scott Bell, and he encouraged it. And so I just opened a spreadsheet and started keeping track of it. And the last 2 years, I've written more than 90,000 words, but I hadn't written 100,000 words, which isn't particularly meaningful. I mean, but other than it's just that practice of the daily writing habit. So I set a goal to do that this year, and I actually hit it back in August, I think. Wow. But so, at that point I was like, okay, maybe we can do 140 or 150,000 words. And then September got super crazy, and I don't know if we'll get there or not, but it's been fun. I mean, the world wasn't going to end if I didn't hit that goal. But it was something to look forward to. I am an internally motivated person.
Sure.
And so, there have been much more important goals in my life that I've achieved than that one, but that's something that has been more recent. And so, that's kind of the structure of the book. And, I've gotten some really good feedback from it. I'm excited about it. It's available wherever people like to buy books online. And that book is called Write Your Novel One Day at a Time.
That book sounds absolutely wonderful and encouraging to people. I think too many people see the writer journey portrayed in television or movies with somebody who's sitting at some beautifully appointed desk, and their windows are open and the curtains are blowing gently, and it's a beautiful day, and they're just zooming along, instead of the usual thing is, the phone is ringing, the dogs are making a lot of noise. You look at the clock, there's 30 minutes. Well, is that really enough time? Should I just forget it. But you pull up your laptop and then you stare at a screen. But that's how it goes. And in that half an hour, you could get 500 words or you could get 30 words. It kind of doesn't matter. Just because if you only get 30 words, probably the next time you sit down, you'll get 1,500. And I'm a goal setter too. I work with a life coach, and we always, in fact, next month, we're going to do an hour-long session and get my business plan solidified for 2023. And I'm always amazed when I go back and look at this stuff that I said I was going to do. And I'm like, I'll be damned. I did it. So yeah, I think it helps relieve your brain from the fog of, okay, what is it I want to do? You've already identified it. So your mental energy is how I'm going to do it, not what I'm going to do.
Yeah. And one of the things I talk about, and particularly in that third part of the book, is, and I think that it's important to highlight, first of all, like you just said, there is scientific research and studies that show the mere act of writing a goal down, even if you don't do any follow-up, even if you're not intentional afterward about putting processes in place to achieve it, just the act of writing it down makes you 40% more likely to achieve the goal.
It's amazing.
It's percolating, it's going on in the back of your head. You may not be actively thinking about it, but you're more likely to achieve it. And the other part that's really important is most of my goals I have not met. So if you want to say that is, I've failed to meet them, they've been failures, however you want to say it, I haven't met them. But what they have done is they have pushed me further down the road than I would have been if I hadn't set the goal in the first place. And so, I haven't, there are times, I won't say I haven't ever been discouraged, but I also know that the goal itself isn't the important thing. The important thing is the progress and continually pushing forward. And whether that's, business, family, writing, whatever it is, that's the important part, is where are we going? Am I being intentional about getting there? If I don't meet this particular goal, then that's fine. But what has it enabled me to do?
Yeah. Progress, not perfection.
Yeah, that's right.
That's great.
So let's jump into today's topic.
Yeah.
Because I also, as much as I enjoy talking about goals, I enjoy talking about writing more.
Yeah.
And I am all the time trying to improve what I'm writing. And like the last 2 days, I haven't moved my story forward that I'm currently writing. I've gone back and just done some light editing for like 10 chapters, just gone through them with pro writing aid, and also just reading through it and adding things here and there that add some more color, because I just really enjoy getting better at writing. And so we talked about having prose that, when we talked with David Ellis several weeks ago about keeping reader interest. And a significant part of that is writing your paragraphs and your pages and your text in a way that keeps the reader's eyes moving. Because I know that when I see a block of text that takes up 2/3 of the page, it's daunting, and I read a lot. And so we wanted to talk today about ways to avoid that and get those necessary character, actions, and description involved in the story so that the reader can involve all of their senses, all those experiential things that put them into that story without having it all force-fed to them.
Yeah. I think this is such a good topic because description is not something I like to read. I confess I will often flip ahead, particularly if I'm reading, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm started, so I will. If I'm reading some British women's fiction, you can have 3 or 4 pages of descriptions of the birds and the bird song as somebody's walking down a lane. Don't care. No, not gonna. So it's not my long suit. And for years, one of my consistent editorial comments was on my work was, you need to fill in description. We don't have any idea of setting. I work at that constantly, and I'm very proud of the fact that I get reviews that people say, I can see where I'm at. I really understand that, but it is not my native spot. And so I've read and studied and learned, and I've got some little examples I want to share about things, but I want to hear your take on description as well.
Yeah, so I know that I am somewhat Spartan about description as well. I want to give the reader a sense of where they're at so they can, when I'm reading, I'm seeing it in my head as I go. And I want them to be able to do that. But I don't go through and describe any of my characters unless it's pertinent. And I want to, create a fact that is specific. Like in my second and third novel, I have a character who she is a teenager and she wears Doc Martens, and she's always got heavy boots, and she's kind of ornery and punkish, and so I provided those details so you could get a sense of who she is and know, but that's because it mattered. And I'm not going in and providing details of the guy is 6'1" with sandy blonde hair and all that, because the reader can fill in those gaps.
Yeah.
And it's not necessary for me to do it. Some people prefer it, but I don't think it's going to turn anybody away. But I guess distinguishing characteristics as far as people go is what I will describe. But beyond that, I'm letting the reader fill in those gaps. And that's basically what I'm trying to do with settings as well. Give them enough information that they can see the immediate setting or smell or taste or hear what's going on. And then, everything else that's in the background isn't really important enough for me to go through. And right now, I'm currently reading a book, I guess the newest novel by John Scalzi. It's a science fiction story called The Kaiju Preservation Society. And I was just noticing as I was reading last night, what a great job he does of incorporating description into what the characters are doing, and so that it has context and isn't just him telling you about what they're saying without having a reason for knowing it. And so what we're going to try here is reading some of our own writing to provide context to this discussion. And I hope that it will be engaging and interesting. We haven't done this kind of thing before. I was trying to think of all the hundreds of hours of podcast listening that I've done over the last several years, whether I've heard anybody do it this way. And I couldn't think of a time. So hopefully it'll be engaging and interesting. I'm going to read to you part of a chapter in this fourth novel that I'm working on. And for you to give me feedback of whether you think it's effective or not effective. You haven't seen, I guess I did send it to you ahead of time several weeks ago. I don't know whether you looked at it or not.
I did.
Okay. And just to, the good, the bad, the ugly, whatever we need to get into about, whether this is effective or what specific things aren't effective. So just for some context, this is a story that the basic premise of it is, if the tooth fairy were evil and had bad intentions, what would happen? And so this is dark fantasy. It's a first person point of view. The main character whose point of view we're getting the story from, his name is Scott. And this is the first time I think that I've included a lawyer as a main character. He's an insurance coverage lawyer, which is actually going to play a role in how things turn out, is why I chose that. So that was intentional. because insurance coverage work, as much as I do it and enjoy it, is not terribly exciting generally. And the other character in this scene, his name is Fiacre, and he is a fairy. So I'm just going to jump right in here. Fiacre crossed his arms and glared at me. So what do you want me to do? Find a pumpkin and turn it into a carriage? Is that on the table? No. There are several kinds of fairies, but none of us do that nonsense. When we turned from 20th Street onto Highland Avenue, I asked, are we headed somewhere particular? Yes and no. You know the round building a couple of streets over? The abandoned one with bars all the way around it? Yes, that's where we're going. Is it, I didn't even want to say it out loud. It felt ridiculous. Is it magical or something? Fiacre smirked and looked at me quizzically. No, it's abandoned. If you're demanding a demonstration, I thought some isolation would be preferable. We passed the next 3 blocks in silence until we arrived at the round building. I had always thought it odd to have a circular building, particularly one this small. I had assumed the offices inside would all be pie-shaped. Nothing about it seemed practical. Fiacre stopped at the ground level entrance on 21st Place and retrieved a key from his pocket. I was mildly annoyed, having expected magic to accompany everything, and so far, my fairy friend had been extraordinary. The first floor had only a bathroom and a reception desk and an iron spiral staircase. The air was thick as molasses and still stifling from the prior day's heat. It was so stagnant that I was sure this was the first time it had been disturbed in weeks, maybe months. I followed Fiacre up the stairs. When my head popped up to the second level, I found that I'd been wrong about wedged offices. This floor was one large office that, because of a round building surrounded, This floor was one large office that, because of a round building surrounded by mirrors, gave its occupants a 360-degree view. I should say windows and not mirrors. Unfortunately, this one no longer. This is what I get from not having an final edited version of this. This one was no longer one of Birmingham's finer areas. When I'd finished taking in the view of empty parking lots and vacant buildings, I turned to Fiacre, who was no longer human. To be fair, he'd never been human, but now he didn't appear human. So that brings us to, there's more where I start then to go into some of Fiacre's physical characteristics that he is revealing for the first time. But I thought, here we have a walk and talk where there's some information being exchanged. Tell me your thoughts on it.
I think that, so first of all, I love the name Fiacre is an interesting name. And it's a good name for audiobooks too. It won't be annoying to listen to. I've learned to pay attention to that. The idea of a circular building is intriguing. They're always kind of intriguing. Whenever you drive by one, you're like, oh, I wonder what that looks like. So that was a good choice. And you don't just say they were going to go to the round building. It was abandoned, pie-shaped offices, or maybe not, whatever. You wove it all in, and I thought that was very seamless. I think this is a really well-handled use of description.
All right.
Yeah, it was good.
It's tough because there's always more information that you could include.
Oh, yeah.
And here, one of the things I wanted to do was it establishes early in the story that it is August in Birmingham, which is just extraordinarily hot. And so I wanted to make sure we have a reminder of this. And in the chapter before, that this is set in the morning, that this is occurring.
Mm-hmm.
But if you ever go into a building in Birmingham, anywhere where it's hot, even the next day, it's just stagnant and hot. And so I just wanted, to give a sense of where we're at and how it feels without just harping on those things. And I really felt like you have to do it in a context of why it's affecting the people here, or else why do I care?
Yeah.
As the reader.
Yeah. I confess I did not go to my works and find examples, so I don't have anything to read.
No, that's fine.
One thing I want to mention is in my murder mystery Deadly Parcel, I have a character in the beginning who ends up committing suicide. And so as I describe her, she is a late 30s school teacher who's never been married and is jilted. Her wedding dress is hanging on. She thinks she's going to get married to this guy who's really already married and is just stringing her along. Her wedding dress is hanging on the back of the door. And so instead of telling you all that stuff about her, I have her having a cat by the name of Mr. Darcy. Okay, that tells you that she's probably got a romantic bent to her, and that she's intelligent and literary and all of that. And her apartment has school supplies, and she's an elementary school teacher. She's got a satchel with stickers coming out of it and all that kind of thing. So I try to tell you about her without beating you over the head with that.
No, and I think that's a perfect name to give the reader that information without having to give it, to spoon feed it to them. Because they're going to make that association.
Yeah, they're going to make the association. So that's the kind of stuff I work at.
Tell me this.
Yeah.
Sorry, I jumped in on you.
No.
Guiding Emily.
Yeah.
And all the Emily books, she's blind.
Yes.
So you're working with one less sense.
Yeah.
And a pretty significant one at that. I guess they're all significant when you only have 5 of them. But how did you approach dealing with that?
Yes. So I had to be very purposeful. Well, after I did all my research and worked with many, many visually impaired people, when I sit down to write those books, I have to be careful in each scene, and I have to write them several times. When she comes into a room, how is she going to experience it? It's largely going to be sound, feeling, is it cold? She can feel the breeze, the sun on her face. She'll know approximately where she is, orienting herself with the sun, touching things in a forest. There's a scene where she's in the redwood garden in Golden Gate Park, and she can feel the large ferns, and she guesses where she is. But I really have to be purposeful in all of that. So maybe that's heightened my awareness.
We've also talked about another of your books where the protagonist had a disability, right? You had okay. But I don't think we've ever talked about what the disability was that she has. So what is the disability that she has?
So in Final Circuit, I don't know if you'd call it disability, but she has a speech defect because she was born with a cleft palate, and the surgery when she was a baby was botched. So it's left her with a speech defect, and she is brilliant, but people don't see her as brilliant. And so that book starts with her coming into a parking garage at dusk. She's parked on the top floor because it's cheapest up there, and the elevator doors open. She looks out at the end of the parking garage into the setting sun, and she sees a man with a ski mask on holding a body in his arms, and it's evident from the angle of the neck that this is a dead person. And he throws the body basically into the trunk of a car and runs towards the elevator, and she's pushing the button to get it closed. She does get down to the bottom floor. She's freaked out, eventually calls the police, and they come and take the police report. But when they go to the parking garage, there's no car, there's no dead body, there's no nothing. And no one is reported missing, it's a serial killer, and that's part of the thing. But because of her speech defect, they just think she's maybe they discount her. except for one cop who doesn't. So that's kind of how I use that. And it's interesting because when I was um, querying this for traditional publishers and I had a bite, but they wanted me to take away her disability. And at the end of this book, because she has a hobby, an unusual hobby of restoring vintage toasters, which is a real thing. She knows about electrical circuits and stuff. She uses that knowledge to save herself. And they said, no, we ought to have her love interest, a cop, save her. And I'm like, what are we talking about? This is, 20, at this point, it was probably 2018. I'm like, no.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this,
No.
following up on
Yeah.
the effect on her speech.
Yeah.
I have read books, and I'm sure most people have, where someone has a stutter or has some effect on their speech that is so prevalent throughout the book that you get distracted.
Yes.
It starts to affect your readership. So
Yeah.
how did you implement that? And I know you want to keep the reader aware of it throughout the book, because you don't want to just
Yeah.
drop it in there and forget about it, because then that's not genuine.
Right.
So how do you make sure to balance those things of the need to, present this information and make sure the reader stays aware of it, and do right by your character by including it,
Yeah.
but not making it a distraction?
And that's a good question. I'm an audiobook listener, so I'm really sensitive to word choices and name choices that drive me crazy. So I mentioned it, set it up in the beginning, and it's something that's caused her to be kind of an introvert. I think she may have been an introvert normally, but it's enhanced her self-isolation. So that carries forward in the book. So you don't, I think, forget about it. In the book, her grandmother has just died, and unbeknownst to her, left her a ton of money. Her mother took off and early on and left her with her grandmother to be raised. So one of her coworkers and friends says, your grandmother wanted you to have surgery and get this finally corrected. And so that's part of the book. So we don't forget about the fact that she's got that, but I don't in the dialogue really keep that going because it irritated me. And I thought it's going to irritate the reader. So that's, an interesting thing you always have to be careful of.
And that's something, I live in Alabama. All of my books are set, particularly Vulcan Rising is set here. We just did an interview with Maddie Dalrymple that will release in a couple of weeks, but we talked about a short story I wrote that's set in rural Alabama. I'm originally from Texas, and in one of my books, one of the characters is from Texas. And I want to include those dialogue cues that tell you, who characters are and make them memorable, and give them that Southern dialect or that Texas drawl, but I don't want to kill you with it. Because like anything else, that gets overbearing. And so what I've done is, the guy from Texas, he'll drop a reckon or a howdy every once in a while. But, it's not on every page. And, the same kind of things with the folks from Alabama or maybe elsewhere in the South. You're going to get your y'alls and, your other cues that this is where folks are from and this is where they talk. And, particularly with the rural characters that I have in the short story, like you're going to get it. But if it becomes so prevalent that you have to stop and figure out how to read because the dialect is so thick, then that defeats the whole purpose of it.
It interferes with storytelling, and that's never going to work.
Yeah. And I think, that goes hand in hand with what we started with of like, you want to signal to the readers the scene and the setting and, the sensory items, the same as you do with the things about your characters without just laying it on too thick.
one of the examples I wanted to mention in one of the books that I was reading early on when I was learning to do description talks about a house on a hill. And the chapter begins with someone driving up to the house on the hill. It's a normal house, 2 windows on the second story, 2 windows on the first floor. And the difference between, in just one sentence, driving up, the sun is shining, windows are open, gentle breeze, curtains fluttering at the window. You feel good. Next one, you're driving up in a nighttime thunderstorm. Lightning is reflected in the windows. A tree is blowing against the side of the house, and an owl is screeching. Okay, that's a whole different feel. And then a third one was the house is on the hill. It is a sunny, calm day. But in contrast to the first one, curtains at the window, the windows are shut. The porch is sagging. A shutter is hanging off. And the sun is glinting against the windows. And it gives the house kind of a vacant stare that gives you a more melancholy feel. So even if you're doing, as we all have to do at times, a little bit of description, you can do a lot. The house isn't a character in the book. The people in the car coming are the characters, but you've set the tone for the dialogue, whether it's going to be, conflict or happy, joyful, ominous, all that.
Yeah. And I think that, setting that mood is so important. And I was listening to the audiobook narration of Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury.
Oh, yeah.
And he is just such a master of setting a mood, just like Neil Gaiman is, of like, exactly what you're getting into when you get into their books. And one of the things I haven't figured out is how to do that in the way that they do it, because it's just some combination. It's the way they tell a story and their word choices that do such an incredible job of setting the mood that so closely correlates with the story that's being told.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're masters at it, for sure.
Well, I think this has been really instructive. It's a great place to end this. We've got next week coming up is our interview with Dan Wells, where we talk about a lot of things. We talk about a lot of things with Dan. But one of the things that I was really excited to talk about and that we led off with was how your worldview affects the writing that you do and what you choose to write and choose, equally importantly, not to write about. And it was such a great interview, and I really enjoyed our conversation with him. So make sure to come back next week for that.
Yeah, I agree. Sounds good.
All
Happy
right.
reading, everybody.
That's right. Thanks, guys.